Explaining yourself isn't clarity, it's a confession. The second you justify your choices, you're not leading, you're pleading. You think you're being respectful? No, you're announcing your insecurity. You think they'll treat you fairly once they understand? Wake up. They don't want clarity. They want control. And Machiavelli wouldn't just disagree with your approach. He'd call it the fastest way to lose a throne. Because every time you explain, you draw the map to your pressure points. You don't just show them your line. You show them how to cross it. And the moment someone realizes you need to be understood, they learn exactly how to control you. That's the real trap. You explain yourself to keep the peace, to clear up confusion, to prove your intentions were good. But in reality, you're surrendering to how they see you. You're essentially saying, your version of events matters more than my position. Your misunderstanding is now my job to fix. Your comfort takes priority over my presence. And Machiavelli would call that a fatal misstep. Because in the world of power, you don't chase perception, you craft it. And the moment you defend yourself, you're already playing by their rules. Let's be clear, explaining and communicating are not the same thing. Machiavelli valued clarity, but not apology. To justify is to kneel. It's saying, I need you to like me enough not to think I'm wrong. Please believe I meant well. I'm scared of being misunderstood. But Machiavelli didn't fear misunderstanding, he weaponized it. Because when you don't explain, people are left guessing. They speculate. They overthink. They get stuck in their own projections. And now, the power flips. You're no longer seeking their approval. They're seeking your clarity. That's the first law. Mystery outclasses precision. So let's dig into the real reason you overexplain. It's fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of being seen as selfish, cold, arrogant, or wrong. You explain because you were conditioned to believe that being misunderstood meant you failed. But Machiavelli would say, let them get it wrong. Let them sit with your silence. Let them wonder why you didn't answer. Let them question why your tone shifted. Let their insecurity do the work for you. Because every second they spend trying to decode you is a second they're not in control. And that tension, the silence, the ambiguity, that's your leverage. Here's how it plays out in real life. You turn someone down, and they ask why, and you start explaining. Now's not a good time. I've got something else going on. Hope that makes sense. You think you're being respectful, but you've just opened the door to negotiation. Now they'll respond with, okay, but how about later? What if I help you finish your task first? What if it only takes a second? Suddenly, your no starts to soften. Your boundary becomes a suggestion. And your authority begins to fade. But picture this instead. You say no, and they ask why. You pause. Give a faint smile and say, because that's what I've decided. And just like that, the door stays closed. Now they're left with nothing. No leverage. No logic to lean on. No weakness to exploit. That's not rudeness, that's strategic dominance. And it works the same in conflict. Someone throws an accusation you know isn't true. They twist your words. They try to box you in. And your instinct? You want to explain. To defend yourself. To set the record straight. It's a subtle shift, but Machiavelli built his entire philosophy around those exact shifts. The kind that quietly dismantle your power long before anyone realizes it's happening. Explaining yourself might feel like clarity, but more often than not, it's a disguised plea. Please don't judge me. Please don't get the wrong idea. Please still like me. And the moment people sense that, they smell blood. No one respects what they can negotiate, and when you start explaining yourself too much, that's exactly what you become, negotiable. Your boundaries turn into suggestions. Your identity becomes a debate. And your authority becomes a group project, one everyone thinks they get to vote on. Machiavelli would never tolerate that. He knew what it cost to let others believe they could redefine you. So he moved with precision. He made decisions without disclaimers. He said little. And when people questioned him, he let silence carry the weight. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because saying it would lower his altitude. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't want clarity. They want control. When they ask for an explanation, it's rarely about curiosity. It's about access to your thought process, your doubts, your motives. So they can anticipate you, adapt to you, beat you. Every detail you give, every time you justify, defend, or explain, you hand them a more detailed map. A map they can use to corner you later. But when you refuse to explain, they're left in the dark. And that darkness creates something powerful, psychological pressure. Pressure to guess, to assume, to fill in the blanks. And in that space, people reveal more about themselves than they ever would if you just told them what they wanted to hear. You don't gain that kind of insight by talking. You get it by letting them squirm in the silence you designed. Picture this. You distance yourself from someone. They approach you, "Did I do something wrong?" You don't explain. You offer a faint smile, maybe say, "I noticed a few things, that's all." And you leave it at that. That moment will haunt them. Because now their own mind turns against them, looping old conversations, guessing, panicking, projecting. And while they spiral, you've already learned what you needed to know. What they're afraid of, how they handle power, how they scramble to regain control. All because you didn't explain. Machiavelli would call that strategic silence. You didn't clarify, you watched. And in watching, you learned more about them than they'll ever know about you. Here's what most people don't realize. Explaining yourself often weakens your credibility. It makes it look like you're second-guessing your decision. It signals self-doubt. It invites scrutiny. People don't trust perfect logic. They trust unshakable confidence. When you move with certainty and say little, they assume there's depth behind it. They invent reasons. They fill in the blanks, in your favor. But when you explain every move, you give them something to pick apart. "Oh, that's why he did that? That doesn't really add up. I wouldn't have handled it like that. Sounds like he's just trying to sound clever." Even if your explanation is flawless, the very act of explaining opens the door to doubt. Machiavelli understood this, which is why he cultivated mystique. He let them wonder. And in wondering, they respected him more. And there's another layer to this. When you stop explaining, you force people to face something they fear, a version of you that doesn't care about being liked. That version? That's the dangerous one. Because that version can't be manipulated. You can't be guilt-tripped. You can't be baited. You can't be shamed into a corner. You don't need to clear the air. You don't need to plead your case. You don't need them to understand. And once they realize they can't reach that part of you, they either pull back or they submit. That's what power does. It creates space. It shifts the tempo of interaction to your rhythm. It makes your silence more powerful than their noise. So how do you build that? You train yourself to hold tension, to stay calm when you're misunderstood, to resist the urge to explain every move. You let people believe what they want, and while they're busy forming opinions, you keep moving forward. Because here's the truth, you don't owe anyone an explanation. Your decisions don't need permission. Your path doesn't need applause. Only the weak need to be understood at every turn. The strong make their move, and let the story be written afterward. This is exactly what Machiavelli practiced. He never rushed to defend himself, never begged to be seen as innocent, and never gave his enemies enough information to predict his next move. He understood that mystery isn't just a weapon, it's a shield. And the more you talk, the more holes you put in it. So stop patching up every misunderstanding. Stop responding to every challenge. Stop mistaking silence for weakness. Because the less you explain, the more seriously they take you. When you explain yourself, you think you're protecting your reputation, but in reality, you're putting it up for auction. Every clarification, every justification, every walkback says one thing. My image is negotiable. That's what makes explaining so dangerous. In Machiavellian terms, it invites debate. It signals flexibility. It tells others they can shape how you're seen, if they just push hard enough. And once someone realizes they can reshape you, they no longer need to overpower you. They just need to keep you talking. Machiavelli understood this. Silence terrifies weak minds. When you don't explain, they assume you know something they don't. They imagine your reasons are sharper, deeper, more deliberate than they could understand. They start respecting your boundaries, not because they agree with them, but because they can't find a way in. That's what real power looks like. being unreadable by design. The man who refuses to explain radiates control, because when no one sees your levers, no one can pull them. Now flip the frame. What happens when you do explain yourself? You shrink. You invite people into your thought process. You open the door to interpretation. You place your logic under their microscope. And even if your reasoning is airtight, you've handed them permission to critique your values, your judgment, your worldview, and they will. Not because you were wrong, but because you gave them the right to judge. Machiavelli would call this a self-inflicted dethroning, handing over the crown just to prove you're not a tyrant. But once it's off your head, it's never fully yours again. Now ask yourself, how do powerful people actually behave? Do world leaders explain themselves after every decision? Do dominant CEOs hop on calls to walk you through their logic? Do apex predators pause to justify the moment they strike? Of course not. Because when you explain too often, you don't come off as thoughtful, you come off as insecure. And Machiavelli knew, insecurity is the easiest scent for enemies to track. It's blood in the water. If they sense you need them to understand, they'll keep testing your limits. So what's more effective than any explanation? A shift in energy. Someone accuses you of being cold? Don't explain. Turn it up. Respond colder. Let them feel the distance. Someone says, "You've been different lately?" Don't say, "I've been busy." Say, "Yes." Then stop. That does two things. It forces them to sit in the discomfort they were trying to offload onto you. And it makes you the mirror. They see themselves in your silence, not in your justifications. That's where real psychological power lives, not in being right, but in letting silence expose who's insecure enough to need an explanation. This isn't coldness for ego. It's restraint for control. Machiavelli understood, most kingdoms don't fall from attack. They collapse from overexposure. Your reasoning is part of your strategy. And strategy should never be public property. Every time you explain yourself, you reveal the pattern. You reveal what pushes your buttons. You teach people how to talk you into things, or out of them. And the man who can be talked into or out of things isn't powerful. He's predictable. And as Machiavelli warned, predictability is the beginning of defeat. There's a phrase in statecraft, deniability is power. But Machiavelli would take it further, ambiguity is greater. Deniability means someone suspects you. Ambiguity means they don't even know what to suspect. They don't know what you believe, what you want, what sets you off, or what leaves you cold. That kind of mental fog doesn't weaken you. It makes you untouchable. Because enemies don't strike what they can't map. Here's a brutal lesson most people never learn. Explaining yourself doesn't erase judgment. People don't believe you because you explained. They believe you because your presence forced them to. You don't earn respect by clearing up every misunderstanding. You earn it when your silence speaks louder than their accusations. And when you hold frame inside that silence, even if they still don't know what you meant, they know better than to push again. So how do you put this into action? Cut half your explanations, immediately. The next time someone asks, "Why did you do that?" Don't deliver context. Deliver clarity. Swap, "Let me explain," for, "I've made my decision." That one sentence can kill hours of manipulation before it even starts. Let people misunderstand you, on purpose. This is a rare skill, controlled misinterpretation. You know they're wrong, and you let them stay wrong. Because while they're busy chasing the wrong answer, you're already moving forward. And by the time they figure it out, you've already won. Because power doesn't come from being perfectly understood. It comes from being unreadable, undeniable, and unbothered. Machiavelli never wanted to be liked. He wanted to be feared, respected, or, even better, misunderstood in a way that worked to his advantage. Because the man who can't be pinned down is the man no one dares to corner. There's always a moment, in every power dynamic, when someone looks you in the eye and says, "So what did you mean by that?" And in that moment, the weak man crumbles. He rushes to explain. He wants to be seen as reasonable, as kind, as not arrogant, not cold, not selfish. But the Machiavellian doesn't flinch. He doesn't explain. He watches. Because he knows, The second they need to ask, he already owns the frame. They're confused. They're uncomfortable. They're reacting to him. And if he explains, he hands that control right back. But if he holds the silence, if he lets them squirm in uncertainty, they never forget it. That's the final, brutal power of not explaining. You become a question they can't answer. And that question sticks. It lives in the gap between what they think about you and what they can't figure out. That's where respect lives, not in clarity, but in calculated ambiguity. Because in a world addicted to oversharing, overdefending, and overexplaining, the one who doesn't feels like power. Look around. Everyone is hooked on clarity. They explain every feeling. They justify every decision. They panic at the thought of being misunderstood. But Machiavelli knew the opposite. The man who lets people get it wrong, on purpose, is always 10 steps ahead. Because while they're reacting to your silence, you're watching their moves. While they're debating your meaning, you're already reshaping the outcome. That is how control is built, not by being seen, but by being felt. Machiavelli didn't argue. He didn't beg to be liked. He didn't chase understanding. He focused on one thing, staying unshakable. And explanations? Those are tremors. They shake your stance. They drop your altitude. They reveal that something got to you, and once they see that, they'll know exactly where to press next. The dangerous man plays a different game. He doesn't explain, he redirects. He doesn't defend, he observes. He doesn't argue, he decides. And the more others press for answers, the colder he becomes. Not as punishment, but as a message. You are not entitled to my clarity. And I am not available for negotiation. That message speaks louder than any explanation ever could. So let's get brutally tactical. Here's how a Machiavellian handles people who demand explanations. He responds with short, closed statements. That's how I operate. That's what I chose. I said what I meant. Each line is a wall, not a doorway. It ends the conversation, not prolongs it. And when they ask, "Why did you do that?" he flips the pressure with a question of his own. "Why does that matter to you? What do you think I meant?" Now they're the one explaining. They're the one exposed. You've turned the spotlight without raising your voice or losing your ground. And beyond words, he uses silence. He lets it linger. He lets them squirm. He lets them fill in the blanks with their own doubts. Because power isn't about filling the space. It's about creating emotional gravity. People will say this is manipulative. And it is. Because manipulation is just strategy, with better timing. And in power dynamics, timing is everything. Explain yourself at the wrong moment, and you give away the game. Stay quiet at the right one, and you own the room without saying a word. The world doesn't need to understand you. It needs to respond to you. So the next time you feel the urge to explain, pause. Feel that tension rise in your chest. That impulse to be liked. To be forgiven. To be approved of. You don't owe them clarity. You don't owe them comfort. You don't owe them closure. You don't owe them a damn thing. Because if you chose your path from strength, if your decision was made from clarity, then their confusion is their problem. Let them wrestle with it. Let them question it. Let them talk about it behind your back. All while you move forward. Without permission. Without apology. Without explanation. That's what Machiavelli would do. Not out of cruelty, but out of focus. And focus is never distracted by the need to be understood. Never forget this. The moment a man starts explaining everything, he becomes readable. Once he's readable, he's predictable. And once he's predictable, he's already been defeated. But the man who holds his silence? The one who lets others fill the gaps with their own fears? He becomes a phantom in their minds, untouchable, unshakable, unstoppable. Let them analyze. Let them speculate. Let them whisper behind closed doors. Because while they chase your shadow, you'll be 10 steps ahead, cold, clear, and completely out of reach. If this struck a nerve, don't just scroll past. Click subscribe and like buttons, and drop a comment about the moment you learned that saying less speaks louder. This is only the beginning. We'll keep unpacking the mindset, strategies, and shifts that transform silence into dominance, and presence into authority. So stay sharp, stay silent, and let the world adjust to you.